I jolted awake. The sound of crackling flames ripped through the early morning quiet. At first, a hazy thought drifted through my sleep-fogged brain, a dream? Maybe a campfire, flickering merrily in the distance? Perhaps a neighbor's summer barbecue, the tantalizing aroma soon to follow? But then, a thick, acrid smoke, stinging my nostrils and clawing at my throat, poured relentlessly through my bedroom window, shattering that illusion. My chest constricted with a sudden, sharp fear. I flung the sheets off my body and scrambled to the window, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. What I saw sent a shockwave of pure, icy dread coursing through my veins. My motorcycle, my police-issued, state-owned Harley-Davidson, was completely engulfed in flames. It stood in my own driveway, a raging inferno against the cool gray concrete. Fire danced across its frame, licking at the pavement like some hellish bonfire unleashed from the depths below. My first instinct, ingrained from years of emergency response, was to grab the fire extinguisher. But even as I stumbled toward the door, a grim certainty washed over me. It was too late. The flames were too high, too intense. The damage was already catastrophic. The heat slammed into my face the second I stepped outside, the sudden warmth a stark contrast to the creeping chill in my soul. My bare feet slapped against the cool concrete, each step a jarring reminder of the nightmare unfolding before me. My heart pounded in my ears, a frantic drumbeat accompanying the sickening crackle of the fire as I stared at the smoldering wreck. But beneath the initial shock, a slow-burning rage began to simmer, coiling in my gut like a venomous snake. That was when I heard it laughter. A cold, mocking sound that cut through the roar of the flames. I whipped my head around, my gaze snapping toward the house across the street. There, in the shadows of a meticulously manicured lawn, stood a small group of people. Wine glasses glinted in their hands as they clinked them together, a celebratory toast to my misfortune. My jaw clenched so tight my teeth ached as recognition dawned. It was the HOA board. Eleanor Albright, their ever-so-smug president, stood front and center, whispering something to the others before flashing a self-satisfied grin in my direction. "Next time, follow the rules, Mr. Davies," she called out, her voice dripping with condescension like venom. For a moment, I was frozen, not out of fear, not out of shock, but because I was struggling to comprehend the sheer audacity, the utter depravity of what these lunatics had done. I had dealt with hardened criminals, reckless drivers, and the occasional back-alley lunatic, but never, in my wildest nightmares, had I imagined suburban homeowners committing an outright felony over something this unbelievably stupid. Just 2 days prior, these same people, these paragons of pristine lawns and enforced conformity, had knocked on my door with a welcome letter thinly veiled threat wrapped in cheerful stationery. The Homeowners Association, or as I had quickly come to think of them, the neighborhood mafia, had made it abundantly clear that joining was highly encouraged. They spoke in that sickeningly sweet, rehearsed tone that made my skin crawl, their eyes gleaming with an unsettling desire for control over my property, over my house, over where I parked my own damn vehicle. I had politely declined, dismissing it as suburban busybody nonsense. Then the fines started rolling in. First, a notice for my grass being half an inch too long. Then another one, claiming my police motorcycle was a non-compliant vehicle and needed to be stored out of sight, accompanied by a hefty $500 fine. I had actually laughed out loud at that one, crumpled it up, and tossed it in the trash where it belonged. I wasn't part of their ridiculous little club, and they had absolutely no authority over me. Apparently, they hadn't taken that well. The fire department arrived within minutes, sirens wailing, lights flashing, turning my quiet street into a chaotic scene. Firefighters, their faces grim, battled the raging flames, hoses snaking across my driveway. The air filled with the acrid stench of burnt rubber and scorched metal, a smell that would forever be etched in my memory. I stood there, arms crossed, a silent observer as my bike, the very machine I used to chase down criminals, respond to emergencies, and serve my community, was reduced to twisted, blackened scrap. One of the firefighters, a guy I knew from town, A volunteer named Mike walked over, his face etched with concern. He let out a low whistle. "Damn, Jack, what the hell happened?" I exhaled slowly, rubbing the back of my neck, the tension there a palpable knot. "The HOA happened." His brow shot up. "You serious?" I didn't answer. I didn't have to. My jaw was clenched so tight my teeth hurt. I knew, with absolute certainty, exactly who had done this. The security cameras I had installed on my property had captured every damn second. Hours later, when the fire was finally extinguished and the smoking wreckage was all that remained, I sat in my living room, the only light emanating from the flickering screen as I reviewed the footage. My fingers tapped a restless rhythm against the table as I watched the grainy black and white video play out. The HOA board, yes, the entire damn board had crept onto my property in the dead of night. I watched, my blood boiling, as one of them, some balding guy in a ridiculous sweater vest, poured gasoline over my bike like a deranged lunatic. Another, a woman I recognized as Eleanor Albright's right hand, a prissy blonde named Carol, lit the match with a sickeningly casual flick of her wrist. My eye twitched. There it was, undeniable video evidence. They had deliberately set fire to a police vehicle. Not just any vehicle, but a state-owned law enforcement motorcycle. A felony. A massive, federal-level felony. And here's the best part, the part that sent a slow, predatory smile creeping across my face. They had absolutely no idea who I really was. Sure, they knew I was a cop. They might have assumed I was just some low-level officer with a beat patrol and a bad attitude. But they didn't know I was a state trooper. They didn't know I had jurisdiction far beyond their little suburban fiefdom. They had no clue they had just committed a federal crime right under the nose of someone who could bring their entire world crashing down around their perfectly coiffed heads. I leaned back in my chair, the smile widening, a feeling of grim satisfaction washing over me. Oh, they had really screwed up this time. The next morning, as the sun painted the sky in soft hues of orange and blue, I stood outside with my arms crossed, watching as the HOA board gathered for their usual morning gossip session near the community garden. Eleanor Albright, still dressed in her signature pearl necklace and power suit, looking like she was about to chair a Fortune 500 company meeting, shot me a triumphant look. "Such a shame about your motorcycle, Mr. Davies," she called out, fake sympathy dripping from every syllable. "Perhaps next time you'll reconsider our community guidelines." I smiled, a slow, deliberate, wolfish grin spreading across my face. "Oh, I definitely will," I replied, my tone light, almost playful. "In fact, I'd love to discuss it with all of you. Maybe even over at the station." She blinked, her perfectly applied mascara not quite masking the flicker of confusion in her eyes. "The station?" I pulled out my badge, flipping it open just enough for the sunlight to glint off the polished metal. Her expression changed instantly. Her smile faltered, the color draining from her face so fast I thought she might actually faint right there on the sidewalk. The other board members shifted uncomfortably, their earlier confidence evaporating like mist in the morning sun. "Yeah," I continued, enjoying the way her throat bobbed as she swallowed hard. "You know, seeing as how you and your little gang committed arson against state property, I figure we should have a proper chat about it. Maybe with a few of my colleagues. You know, the ones who arrest people for felonies." Eleanor Albright took a step back, then another, her power suit suddenly looking less imposing. The other HOA members looked like deer caught in headlights, their faces pale with dawning horror. I let out a slow chuckle. "See you soon, folks." And with that, I turned and walked back into my house, leaving them to wallow in their incoming doom. Oh, this was going to be fun. The HOA members were in full-blown panic mode. It was obvious from the way they huddled together outside Eleanor Albright's house, whispering in frantic tones, their heads bobbing nervously. Some of them kept glancing at my house, their faces a mask of dread and confusion. I watched from my porch, sipping my morning coffee, a grim satisfaction warming me from the inside out as I enjoyed the sight of their entire world unraveling before them. The same people who had smirked and laughed as they set my motorcycle on fire now looked like scared rats trapped in a sinking ship. And the best part? They still didn't know the full extent of the trouble they were in. I had spent the entire night reviewing the security footage, making multiple copies, and preparing my next move. It wasn't just about revenge, though let's be honest, that part was pretty damn satisfying. This was about justice, about making sure these power-hungry, self-important busybodies learned, once and for all, that they weren't above the law. They had played their little suburban mafia game for far too long, terrorizing homeowners with their ridiculous rules and outrageous fines, thinking no one would ever stand up to them. Well, they had finally messed with the wrong guy. By mid-morning, I got a call from the station. My buddy, Officer Ramirez, had already seen the footage. His reaction was priceless. He had laughed for a full minute, a hearty, booming laugh that echoed through the phone, before saying, "You mean to tell me a bunch of soccer moms and retirees committed first-degree arson on a state trooper's bike? Oh man, this is going to be epic." He promised to handle the initial paperwork while I prepared for the next step, the HOA meeting, scheduled for noon. I definitely didn't want to miss that. So, after a quick breakfast, I got dressed in my casual off-duty clothes, slipped my badge into my pocket, and headed down the street. The meeting was being held at the community clubhouse, the same place where they had probably toasted to my misfortune the night before. When I walked through the doors, the room fell silent. Every single HOA board member was there, sitting at their long, polished table, looking at me like a ghost had just materialized before them. Eleanor Albright was seated at the center, her expression carefully neutral, but the tight grip she had on her pen betrayed her frayed nerves. The other members shifted uncomfortably in their seats, avoiding my gaze, suddenly looking much less confident than they had been when they were gleefully setting my property on fire. "Mr. Davies," Eleanor Albright said finally, forcing a brittle smile that didn't reach her eyes. "To what do we owe the pleasure?" I took my time walking up to the table, letting the silence stretch between us, thick and heavy with unspoken accusations and dawning fear. Then, I pulled out my phone, tapped the screen, and turned it around for them to see. The footage played in full clarity, the gasoline being poured, the match being lit, the gleeful laughter, the raging flames. The color drained completely from Eleanor Albright's face. Someone in the back let out a small, strangled gasp. "I think," I said, my voice calm, almost amused, "we need to have a little chat." The reaction was instant. The balding guy in the sweater vest, the one who had seemed a little too eager with the gasoline, shot to his feet, his face flushed with indignation. "This is outrageous," he sputtered. "You can't just sit down, Roger," I interrupted, my voice dropping to a low, dangerous tone I usually reserved for uncooperative suspects. He sat. Eleanor Albright took a shaky breath, her composure starting to crumble around the edges. "Mr. Davies, I'm sure there's a reasonable explanation for this." "Oh, I'm sure there is," I said, crossing my arms. "I'd love to hear it. Maybe you can explain why a group of homeowners decided to commit felony arson over a parking dispute?" No one said a word. The silence hung heavy in the air. I let it drag on for a few more excruciating seconds before continuing. "Here's what's going to happen. In about an hour, officers will be arriving at your homes with arrest warrants. You see, unlike you, I don't just make up rules and fine people for existing. I actually enforce real laws. And setting fire to a police vehicle? That's a serious crime. So, congratulations! You all just turned your little HOA into a criminal organization." The panic in the room was palpable. One woman clutched her pearls like she was about to faint. Another man was sweating so profusely it looked like he had just run a marathon. But Eleanor Albright, bless her delusional heart, was still trying to cling to control. This is ridiculous," she said, though her voice lacked its usual imperious tone. "This is all a misunderstanding." I smirked. "Right. A misunderstanding. You accidentally poured gasoline on my bike. You accidentally lit the match. She licked her lips, searching desperately for an argument, any argument. You're blowing this completely out of proportion. I leaned in slightly, lowering my voice just enough to make the fine hairs on her neck stand up. Tell you what, Eleanor. Why don't you call my captain and explain to him why you thought it was a good idea to burn a state-owned motorcycle? Maybe he'll see your side of things. Maybe he won't press for the maximum sentence. Her carefully constructed facade finally cracked. Her eyes darted around the room, looking for support, but there was none to be found. The other HOA members were shifting uncomfortably, their faces etched with the horrifying realization that she had led them straight into a colossal disaster. Then, the doors opened, and in walked two uniformed officers. Officer Ramirez was in the lead, looking entirely too amused at the whole situation. "Good afternoon, folks," he said cheerfully, a wide grin spreading across his face. "I've got some paperwork here with your names on it." Absolute chaos erupted. Some members tried to protest, their voices rising in shrill indignation, but they were quickly silenced by the sight of handcuffs being pulled from belts. The woman who had clutched her pearls actually did faint this time, slumping dramatically against her chair. One man, his face a mask of terror, tried to make a run for it, only to be intercepted by the other officer at the door. It was a full-blown meltdown. Eleanor Albright stood up, her face contorted with fury, her composure completely shattered. "This is harassment!" she shrieked, her voice cracking with outrage. "We are upstanding members of this community. You can't do this." Officer Ramirez just grinned, the picture of professional detachment. "Ma'am, you burned a cop's bike. We absolutely, positively can do this." One by one, the HOA members were handcuffed and escorted out of the clubhouse. Some cried, some screamed, some begged for leniency. None was given. As I watched them being led to the squad cars, their faces a mixture of shock and disbelief, I couldn't help but shake my head. These people had spent years lording over others, thinking they were untouchable. They had bullied homeowners, fined them for absurd reasons, and acted as if they were above the law. But now they were just criminals. Officer Ramirez clapped a hand on my shoulder, a chuckle rumbling in his chest. "You know," he said, shaking his head in disbelief, "I've seen a lot of stupid criminals in my time, but this takes the cake." I laughed, a genuine, heartfelt laugh, feeling lighter than I had in days. "Yeah," I said, watching as Eleanor Albright was unceremoniously shoved into the back of a squad car, still screaming about how this was unfair. "It really does." As the last of the HOA members were driven away, sirens fading into the distance, I took a deep breath in, inhaling the sweet, sweet scent of justice. The neighborhood was finally free. And damn, did it feel good. The neighborhood became quieter than it had been in years. Without the constant presence of the HOA lurking over every minor detail, things started to feel normal. People mowed their lawns without fear of fines, parked their cars in their own driveways without receiving citations, and most importantly, no one was burning down state property in the middle of the night. The ridiculous reign of the HOA was over, and it was about damn time. The court case that followed was nothing short of a spectacle. The entire town had heard about the incident, and everyone wanted to see how it would play out. The courtroom was packed on the day of the hearing, and I had to fight the urge to laugh as I watched Eleanor Albright march in, dressed in her finest power suit, acting as if she was walking into a gala instead of a criminal trial. She carried herself with the same smug attitude she always had, as if she truly believed she was above the law. The other HOA members, however, were a different story. They looked like they had aged a decade overnight, their faces pale and etched with regret. The prosecution didn't hold back. The security footage was played in full view of the entire courtroom. Every damning moment was crystal clear, the gasoline being poured, the match being lit, the triumphant little celebration they had afterward. Gasps rippled through the audience. Even the judge had to pause for a moment before shaking his head in disbelief. Eleanor Albright tried to argue that it was all just a misunderstanding. She claimed that they were simply trying to enforce community standards and that my refusal to comply had left them with no other choice. When that flimsy defense crumbled, she shifted tactics and tried to play the victim, claiming that they had been intimidated by me and that the fire was an accident. The judge was having none of it. "You expect me to believe," he said, rubbing his temples with a weary sigh, "that 6 grown adults accidentally poured gasoline onto a police motorcycle, accidentally lit a match, and then accidentally stood around laughing while it burned?" Eleanor Albright stammered, her carefully rehearsed words failing her. The judge didn't wait for an answer. He turned to the jury, who didn't even need to deliberate for long. The verdict came swiftly: guilty. Guilty on every single count. Sentencing day was even better. Some of them got probation, hefty fines, and community service. A few, including Eleanor Albright and her closest lackeys, got actual jail time. She had been so certain she could talk her way out of it, but the moment the handcuffs clicked around her wrists, reality hit her hard. The woman who had ruled over this neighborhood with an iron fist was now just another criminal being escorted out of the courtroom. The fallout from the case was massive. The HOA was effectively dissolved overnight, with most of its board members behind bars or too ashamed to show their faces in public. There was no one left to keep it running. The community held a vote, and in record time, the HOA was officially disbanded. People celebrated like it was a national holiday. Someone even set off fireworks in their backyard, something that would have earned them a $100 fine just a week earlier. The best part? The funds that had once been used to pay for the HOA's ridiculous rules and enforcement were now being put to better use. After some discussion with the neighborhood, we decided to turn the old HOA office into something truly beneficial, a community park. But not just any park. It was going to be a barbecue and gathering spot, a place where people could enjoy their own property without fear of being harassed over fence heights or the color of their front doors. I made sure to personally oversee the demolition of the HOA office. Watching that building get torn down was one of the most satisfying moments of my life. Gone were the endless stacks of fines, the patronizing newsletters, the ridiculous regulations about mailbox styles. In their place would be picnic tables, a grill station, and a giant sign that read, "HOA Free Zone." The irony wasn't lost on me. The same land that had once been used to control people was now being used to bring them together. The first community barbecue was a massive success. Families who had been at odds for years over petty HOA disputes sat together laughing, eating, and enjoying the freedom they had fought for. Even some of the police officers who had helped with the arrests showed up. Officer Ramirez, ever the jovial one, took one look at the banner I had hung over the grill station and burst out laughing. "You really named this the anti-HOA cookout?" he said, shaking his head as he grabbed a plate of food. "Damn right, I did," I replied, flipping a burger with a grin. "Got to make sure no one ever forgets what happened here." People started sharing their own horror stories about the HOA, trading tales of absurd fines and power-hungry board members. One guy talked about how he had been fined for having an improperly shaped flower bed. Another told a story about getting a citation because his trash can was visible for exactly 3 minutes past the HOA's strict pickup window. The more stories I heard, the more I realized just how much people had suffered under their ridiculous rule. But now they were free. As the sun started to set, casting long shadows across the park, I sat back in my chair, watching the community come together in a way it never had before. Kids were playing, neighbors were talking, and for the first time since I moved here, I actually felt like I belonged. Then, out of the corner of my eye, I spotted a new face. A guy probably in his late 40s, maybe early 50s, was walking around the park, looking at the setup with interest. He eventually made his way over to where I was sitting and extended a hand. "Nice place you got here," he said with a friendly smile. "I just moved into the neighborhood." "Name's Greg." "Jack," I said, shaking his hand. He gestured toward the banner with a questioning look. "So, what happened to the old HOA?" I chuckled, glancing around at the happy, relaxed crowd. "They had a little accident with fire." Greg laughed, clearly thinking I was joking. "Well, sounds like this place is better off without them. Hey, speaking of which, have you guys thought about starting a new HOA? You know, one that's a little more reasonable?" I set my drink down, turned to look him dead in the eye, and grinned. "Greg, I'm going to pretend I didn't hear that." The look of panic that flashed across his face was priceless. He held up his hands, laughing nervously. "Kidding. Totally kidding." I handed him a plate piled high with barbecue. "Good. Now eat before I start writing fines." The night ended with fireworks, laughter, and a sense of peace that had been missing for far too long. I had moved into this neighborhood looking for quiet, but I had found something even better. I had found a community worth fighting for. And in the end, that was better than any fine free lawn or a perfectly measured flower bed. As I leaned back and took a deep breath, I realized one thing: I had won. And damn, did victory taste good. Valuable lesson for the audience: this story serves as a potent reminder that even seemingly innocuous organizations, when fueled by unchecked power and a desire for control, can overstep their boundaries with devastating consequences. It highlights the importance of standing up against injustice, no matter how small it may seem, and the satisfaction that comes from fighting for your rights and the well-being of your community. Never underestimate the power of evidence and the importance of knowing your own rights when dealing with overzealous authorities. What are your thoughts on this story? Have you ever had a run-in with a tyrannical HOA? Share your experiences in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this story, be sure to like this video and subscribe to the channel for more engaging content. The following weeks were filled with a sense of liberation I hadn't felt since I left the military. The oppressive atmosphere that had hung over the neighborhood for so long had finally lifted. People started to connect with each other in ways they hadn't before, organizing impromptu potlucks and helping each other with yard work, not out of fear of fines, but out of genuine neighborliness. It was like a weight had been lifted, and the community could finally breathe. My own life returned to a semblance of normalcy. I got a new motorcycle, a sleek, powerful machine that I parked proudly in my driveway, no longer fearing the judgmental eyes of the HOA board. The scars on the concrete from the fire served as a constant reminder of the battle that had been fought and won. One afternoon, a few months later, I was washing my new bike when Greg, my new neighbor, walked over, a six-pack of local craft beer in his hand. "Figured you could use one of these," he said with a friendly grin. "Much appreciated," I replied, taking a bottle. We sat on my porch, watching the kids from the neighborhood play tag in the newly established HOA Free Zone Park. "You know," Greg said, taking a swig of his beer, "when I first moved in and heard about what happened, I thought it was crazy. But seeing how this neighborhood has changed, it's amazing. People actually talk to each other now. It feels like a real community." "That's because it is," I said, a sense of quiet pride swelling in my chest. "It just took a little push to get rid of the bad elements." We both chuckled. A comfortable silence settled between us as we watched the sun begin its slow descent, painting the sky in vibrant shades of orange and purple. "So," Greg said after a while, a mischievous glint in his eye, "about that new HOA, just kidding." He threw his hands up in mock surrender as I gave him a playful glare. "Don't even think about it," I warned, a smile tugging at the corner of my lips. "This neighborhood has had enough of rules and regulations for a lifetime." "Agreed," Greg said, raising his beer in a toast. "To freedom and good neighbors." "To freedom and good neighbors," I echoed, clinking my bottle against his. The peace that had settled over the neighborhood was a tangible thing. The fear and resentment that had festered for years had been replaced by a sense of unity and camaraderie. People were finally free to live their lives without the constant scrutiny and petty tyranny of the HOA. The story of the HOA on fire became a local legend, a cautionary tale whispered among neighbors and a source of amusement for the rest of the town. Eleanor Albright and her cronies eventually served their time, their reputations forever tarnished. The once powerful HOA was nothing more than a distant, unpleasant memory. As for me, I continued my work as a state trooper, patrolling the highways and serving my community. But now, I also had the satisfaction of knowing that I had made a real difference right in my own backyard. I had stood up against injustice, and in doing so, I had helped to create a better place for everyone. And that, I realized, was a victory worth more than any perfectly manicured lawn.